Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. The Beads, 1948, Marie Cashpaw. I didn't want June Morrissey when they first brought her to my house, but I ended up keeping her the way I would later end up keeping her son, Lipshaw, when they brought him up the steps. I didn't want her because I had so many mouths I couldn't feed. I didn't want her because I had to pile the children in a cot at night. One of the babies slept in a drawer to the dresser. I didn't want June. Sometimes we had nothing to eat but grease on bread. But then the two drunk ones told me how the girl had survived by eating pine sap in the woods. Her mother was my sister, Lucille. She died alone with the girl out in the bush. We don't know how the girl done it, said the old drunk woman who I didn't claim as my mother anymore. Lucille was coughing blood, offered the Morrissey, the whining no good who had not church married my sister. You dog, I said. Where were you when she died? He was working in the potato fields, the old drunk one wheedled. Her eyes had squeezed back into her face, her nose had spread, and her cheeks were shot with black veins. He was rolling in his own filth, more like it, I said. They were standing on my steps because I would not ask them onto my washed floor. I can't take in another wild cat, I said. Maybe it scared me, the feeling I might have for this one. I knew how it was to lose a child that got too special. I'd lost a boy. I had also lost a girl who would have almost been the age this poor stray was. Those Lazars just stood there, yawning and picking their gray teeth, with the girl between them most likely drunk too. Not older than 9 years old, she could hardly stand upright. I looked at her. What I saw was starved bones, a shank of black strings, a piece of rag on her I wouldn't have used to wipe a pig. There were beads around her neck, black beads on a silver chain. What's that? A rosary on her neck? They started laughing, seesawing against the rail, whooping when they tried to tell the joke out. It was them bug eyes, said the old one, them ignorant bush Indians who found her and couldn't figure out how she was raised, except the spirits. They slung them beads around her neck to protect themselves. Get out of here, I grabbed the girl, before I sick the dogs on you. Too good, the old drunk flapped. Too damn good to wipe your own crap, ain't you? Storing money in your jar. What about your mother? Ignatius, she shrieked. That was the name of my father. The Morrissey had enough sense to be dragging her down the steps. Prince, I yelled. Dookie, Rex. The dogs came bounding up. The two went stumbling off, holding each other's sagging, weighted arms, and that was all I had to see of those Lazars for a long time. So I took the girl. I kept her. It wasn't long before I would want to hold her against me tighter than any of the others. She was like me, and she was not like me. Sometimes I thought she was more like Eli. The woods were in June, after all, just like in him, and maybe more. She had sucked on pine sap and grazed grass and nipped buds like a deer. The only Lazar I had any use for was Lucille. So from the first, I tried to find my sister's looks in the girl. I took her down behind the shack where we kept the wash tub in the summer, lugging a kettle of boiling water and a can of fuel. I put kerosene in her hair, wiped the nits out with a rag and comb. I knew how much fuel on her scalp must have burned, but she never moved, just kept her eyes screwed shut and plainly endured. That was the only likeness I saw to Lucille. Otherwise, as I scrubbed the pitiful scraps of her and wiped ointment over the sores, I saw nothing, no feature that belonged to either one, Lazar or Morrissey, and I was glad. It was as if she really was the child of what the old people called Nanidug, Mamadug, invisible ones who live in the woods. I could tell, even as I watched, that the devil had no business with June. There was no mark on her. When the sores healed, she would be perfect. As I clipped her hair away from her face, I even saw that she might be pretty looking. Really not like Lucille, I thought, or anyone else I was related to. It was no wonder, but this made me like the girl still better. Her look started to gleam and shine once I had her eating like a human. I cut down a dress of Zelda's, a pair of Gordy's pants, a blouse I had owned myself. The one thing she kept on wearing was the beads. Trying to explain to her that they were holy beads, not mere regular jewelry, did no good. She just backed away and clutched them in her fist. She wore them constant, even though the others teased her and jerked them lightly from behind when I was not looking. There was no devil in her. If there was, I would have seen. She hardly spoke two words to anyone and never fought back when Aurelia pinched her arm or Gordy sneaked a bun off her plate. That is why, as things went on, I found myself talking for her. Gordy, I'd say, stop. She hates you, to pull her hair. It was as though I took over and became the voice that wouldn't come from her lips, but could be seen very plain in the wide upslanted black eyes. At first, because I liked her so, I thought I knew what she was thinking. But as it turned out, I did not know what went through her mind at all. They used to like playing in the woods, and I liked them to play there too. They could run and scream all day as loud as they wanted. I liked the house to myself, afternoons. The babies fell asleep, and Nectar worked off in the fields for someone else. Then I could think. I didn't have to sit still to think. All I needed was the quiet. I worked hard, but I let my thoughts run out like water from a dam. I was churning and thinking that day. With each stroke of my dasher, I progressed in thinking what to make of Nectar. I had plans, and there was no use him trying to get out of them. I'd known from the beginning I'd married a man with brains, but the brains wouldn't matter unless I kept him from the bottle. He would pour them down the drain where his liquor went unless I stopped the holes, wore him out, dragged him back each time he drank, and tied him to the bed with strong ropes. I had decided I was going to make him into something big on this reservation. I didn't know what, not yet. I only knew when he got there, they would not whisper, "Dirty Lazar," when I walked down from the church. They would wish they were the woman I was, Marie Cashpaw. I thought of my mother, strip of old blanket from her belt, and I dashed so hard the cream stuck to the wood. I heard yells, Zelda's high strained voice, the note she used when something she could tell on had happened. She flopped in the door. "What is it now?" I asked, expecting Gordy had put a burr in her hair. "It's June," she gasped. "Mama, they're hanging June out in the woods." I jumped. It was like a string snapped from my chair. I ran out like a mad thing, over the field, right on Zelda's heels. When I got to the place, I saw Gordy was standing there with one end of the rope that was looped high around a branch. The other end was tied in a loose loop around June's neck. "You got to tighten it," I heard June say clearly, "before you hoist me up." I rushed forward. I flung off the noose. I grabbed Gordy's ear and wrapped his hind end. For good measure, I grabbed Aurelia and licked her good too. When I'd finished, I threw them down and stood staring at them, panting and furious. "Do you know what you almost did?" I screamed. "She wanted us to hang her," Gordy said. "We were playing. She stole the horse." "She told us to," Aurelia said. "She said where to put the rope." Their lies maddened me. "I'll show you where to put the rope," I yelled. I was going to knot it and use it again on them when I heard a dry little sound, a tearless weeping sound from June, and I turned. She was standing upright, tall, and bone thin and hopeless, with the rosary wrapped around her hand as it is wrapped around the hands of the dead. "You ruined it." Her eyes blinked at me, dry, as she choked it out. "I stole their horse, so I was supposed to be hanged." I gaped at her. "Child," I said, "you don't know how to play. It's a game, but if they hang you, they would hang you for real." She put her head down. I could almost have sworn she knew what was real and what was not real, and that I'd still ruined it. "You damn old bitch," I heard, unbelievably, those words muttered under her breath. "What?" "You damn old bitch," she said aloud again. I grabbed the back of her shirt and yanked her flying across the field. She was light as a leaf. I tossed her in the house, then I grabbed the jaw and packed a handful of soap flakes in her mouth. None of my children ever called me a bad name before. She spat and bubbled. "Damn old chicken," she gasped again. Looking at her face, strained and wild, sick and grinning on the soap, I had to wonder if she knew what she was saying. Was her mind shot? The other children were gaping at the door, satisfied with horror, thrilled with her punishment. "Chores," I said. They vanished in a whirl of clothes and flying hair. Then I set June down in front of me and closely watched her. Brave as me, that was June. The soap flakes surely gagged her, but she spat them carefully into the dishcloth I put her in her hands. She wouldn't look at me. "Look at me," I said. I turned her head toward me and looked in her sorrowful black eyes. I looked a long time, as if I was falling down a hill. She blinked gravely and returned my stare. There was a sadness I couldn't touch there. It was a hurt place. It was deep. It was with her all the time like a broke rib that stabbed when she breathed. I took her hand. "June Morrissey," I said, "your mama was my sister." She looked at me, still not speaking. "Your mama died," I said. There was a flicker of a lash. "You can be my girl and live here." She spoke to me finally, with no expression. "I don't care." Maybe she cared and maybe she did not. She stayed shut. Nectar had no time for any of them then, not with his slim wages and his chips at the pool hall and home-brewed wine. If I wasn't feeding the children, I was chasing Nectar down. I knew all the back rooms. I'd take money from his hand that was lightning on the bar. I'd leave him nothing. He'd have to come home and beg when he needed more. So I didn't have much time for any one of the children about then, and I was glad that summer when Eli came around. Spring and summer, when the furs were thin, we'd see more of Eli around home. He lived in a mud chink bachelor shack on the other end of the land. He was a nothing and nowhere person, not a husband match for any woman, but I had to like him. Eli drank, but he never lost his head. He rarely spoke. Sometimes we sat in a room all evening, hardly talking. Although we spoke easy with the children, I'd overhear. He had a soft, hushed voice, like he was stalking something very near. He showed them how to carve, how to listen for the proper bird call, how to whistle on their own fingers like a flute. He taught June, or she taught him. They went into the woods with their snares and never came home empty handed. They went to the sloughs to shoot mud hens and brought home a bag of the tiny black greasy birds. Nectar was rarely home then. He worked late or sneaked to gamble. We'd roast the birds and make a high pile of their twig bones in the middle of the table. Eli would sing his songs, wild, unholy songs, Cree songs that made you lonely, hunting songs used to attract deer or women. He wasn't shy when he sang them. I had to keep to my mending. I was seeing how the girl spoke more often once he started coming. She'd picked an old scrap of billed hat from a dump and wore it just like him, soft and squashed in on her hair. I began to understand what she was doing as time went on. It was a mother she couldn't trust after what had happened in the woods. But Eli was different. He could chew pine sap too. The old hens were starting to cackle. 7 senses. 7 senses for scandal was what they had in those days. They came around to my door just to pass the time away. I let them in for brewed coffee. They were the ones I knew the smell of, who made novenas and holy days and nosed up to the priests. They were eager to sniff what was happening in my house. Where's Nectar? Old Lady Blue, innocent as day, wonders. She thinks she saw him passed out around back of the agency pump house, but certainly that could not be him. Does Eli, your brother-in-law, live here now instead? Sly and shriveled old bean pod. How about that girl? Says old fat LaRue. Do you trust him alone with her all the time like that? I see them coming out of the woods down the road. What do you think they got in their bag? I just laugh. Don't let them get a wedge in. Then I turn the table on them because they don't know how many goods I've collected in town. How's your son? Too bad he crossed the border. I heard he had to go. Are you taking in his newborn? I tell you, for your own good, your man goes to Lamartin's house with the bag bottle, Mrs. Blue. How's your heart? It's a shame your daughter left you. I didn't like to be the one to remind those old crows of their own bad lives, but I had to protect my plants. There was just a temporary hitch in them, nectar having a lasting flame. One night and then another night, he didn't come home. The second night, Eli sang late until the children hung asleep in their chairs. They had to be carried off and fit together on the rollaway, neat puzzles of arms and legs. When they were all arranged, we went back to the kitchen. This was usually the time Eli walked back to his place, but instead of taking leave, he sat down at the table again and rolled a stub of tobacco from his pouch. It was nothing. I sewed a long rip, a longer seam. It was nothing. But I felt his eyes resting upon me, and I couldn't look up at him. The cloth turned in my hands. The lamp burned. I thought of lakeshore pebbles, naked as eyes and smooth, and I thought of his lean hands, and I did not dare move. Something dark and unwavering, fringed like a flower's mouth, was collecting in the room between us. I felt him standing up. I felt the rustle of his soft stained clothes. He stepped once. The boards creaked. I went helpless at the sound, and my hands locked. Marie? He asked, very quiet. I did not look up. When I didn't answer, he stepped to the door quickly, all of a sudden, and walked out. My head snapped up. I looked directly into the face of June. Soundless as air, she had unwound herself from all the others and stood in the doorway, waiting and watching for what she felt in the air. She didn't know what she felt. I put the needle down. Come here, I said. She came, walking as in a dream, and I held her in my lap for the first and only time. I held her and I stroked her hair and hummed in her ear. She pretended to sleep, breathing evenly and pure. I stroked the beads around her neck. Then sleep took her for real. The strain went out of her. The breath came deep. She sagged like an empty sack. I held her until my legs went numb under her weight, until the lamp wick smoked, until the board creaked again, and it was Nectar. Come home. I had fallen asleep in the chair. I don't know how long he'd stood there, staring at me with the child in my arms. I saw that he had gone through the ringer. He was red-eyed, gaunt, and he was drunk. When I opened my eyes, he began to reach into his pockets with both hands. He pulled out bills, coins, and crumpled dollars. He laid them in the mending. He took the money from his hatband. He emptied his shoes. He had a small roll in his sock. He had a bill clipped to his belt. Come here now, he said. The money was a rumpled, rinking pile. I never moved. He bent over and took June from my arms. He laid her in the small space of bed where she belonged, and then he came back to the kitchen for me. I didn't ask him where he got all that money. I went down beneath his hands and lay quiet. I rolled with his current like a stone in the lake. He fell on me like a wave, but like a wave, he washed away, leaving no sign he'd been there. I was smooth as before. I slept hard, and when I woke, he was gone. All day with the children, I felt a low grief I couldn't name yet. Something inside me had shrunk and hardened in the deep. One thing more, he had not left behind even a trace of coin. When I went out to the kitchen, I saw that the table was bare. He might not have even come home. It was so discouraged me, I could not go out this time and drag him back. I was so deeply sunk that I was not surprised when the girl came to me, anxious and still. I was not surprised that she would speak to me. I was peeling potatoes in the same chair we sat in the night before, but she'd slept through that, of course, and would not remember. I want to live with Eli, she said in a voice clear as the voice she used giving directions to be hung. I'm going to Eli's house. Go ahead then, I said. I kept peeling the potato, one long spiral, and it's finished. I never even looked when she walked out the door, and only later in the season, when everything was bare and the rain slashed down without mercy to turn the clean snow, did I reach my hand deep in the lard can where I kept my spools, scraps, and papers of pins. I knew before I even touched them, her beads in a black heap. I don't pray. When I was young, I vowed I would never be caught begging God. If I want something, I get it for myself. I go to church only to show the old hens they don't get me down. I don't pray, but sometimes I do touch the beads. It has become a secret. I never look at them. Just let my fingers roam to them when no one is in the house. It's a rare time when I do this. I touch them, and every time I do, I think of small stones at the bottom of the lake, rolled aimless by the waves. I think of them polished. Too many people, it would be a kindness, but I see no kindness in how the waves are grinding them smaller and smaller until they finally disappear. Nectar's mother got her name from the time she went at a bear, no weapon in her hand. As I have heard it told, the bear turned from her straight charge. The same with me. I learned not to meet Rush's bear head on. So when she showed up one morning, I pretended at first not to see her. She was down at the slough, a gun cradle close, sighting into the reeds. She followed a mallard with the barrel, peppered it, then gave a high trill. Gordy heard the sound and ran to see what she brought down. I turned away, went into the barn, decided no matter what happened, I wouldn't notice, wouldn't speak, wouldn't care. My son came to me, his pants dripping wet, the bird hanging from one fist. Grandma's on her way up the hill. Pluck that thing, I ordered him. Then she was there, behind me as I milked the cow, skimmed cream. I could feel her sharp eyes pricking my sweater, my big man shirt, and I knew she saw exactly how far along this baby was because she had delivered many. I turned to greet her as my mother, though she'd been a disappointment of my hopes, as much as I was of hers. Her face was vivid, carved on thin bones, and she had withered powerfully, evaporated into the shape of her own opinions. Although I'd faced down the raging nun and had no fear of my own relatives, although I wasn't afraid of the French priest, although I had slapped away men who came to work on Nectar when he was sober, I was edgy in the presence of Rush's bear. She peered into my little white cream can, made a noise to indicate that the amount inside was pitiful. I was saving cream to sell in those days, trying to make butter, piecing quilts, sewing other people's clothes, beading dance outfits, whatever I could do to get by without Nectar. I even tried to sell our cats, our kittens, and dried teas and berries we picked. I had thought of bringing the old lady's mallard to the store when I saw it in Gordy's hand, but I didn't dare suggest it. We needed some basics: salt, flour, sugar to put up the choke cherries, money for dress and pants material. And now it hit me, because I knew in that first moment that she intended to stay. We needed money for the special things that Rush's bear liked: the sore joint creams and foot bath salts, the molasses for her cravey tooth. The only thing that wouldn't cost money, I thought to myself, was this baby. I knew it was a girl because of June, because of how bad I had yearned to keep her. And in spite of how we barely made it through each day, I wanted this baby. I lacked softness in my life, a sweet breath. I didn't expect good to come from anything I did anymore, but I would have this little baby, mine alone. Goes bad quick, was all Rush's bear said of my kept cream. Stinks, she said of the only place we had for her to sleep. She hated all she saw and all we did. She began to throw pots around and smack the walls with a stick of wood. She was burning with an old woman's furious dread. Still, she raised her feather and her braid of sweetgrass and began to bless the house. Her blessing could hold rocks, we knew. Soon she left off with bringing down the good from above and started slinging accusations. Leave this place, I told her when she began to call me names. I could take the son's absence, but not his mother's presence. You're too much trouble, I said, when her shouts grew worse and worse. I'll throw you out of here myself, I said, going at her. At that, she finally grew quiet and tried to still herself, brushing her own face with the feather of the eagle, touching the beautiful blue beads on the tip, the white buckskin fringe she had sewed there to honor it. Her voice come from a far place, very small, and she said to me, I have nowhere else to go. So she tamed down and stayed. She had looked over the bleak edge of her life, saw that I was her last hold. In the days that followed, I was surprised to find that she seemed to have noticed the shape of my loneliness. Maybe she found it was the same as hers. I had my last baby in the deepest degree, cold so far fetched the dipper froze quick to the bucket that night in the kitchen. It was me let the fire go out, heavy sleeping, and me who knew exactly when it happened. I was pinned in the dark, flat on my back with my eyes open when the cramps began. Then the labor, building in me like small ripples. Maybe by the afternoon, I thought, the baby would come. I tried to drift off and save strength, but my eyes kept opening. I saw the breath of my children raise into the freezing air, and the breath of the old woman, too. I went to sleep and dreamed I had the baby, so simply. I dreamed it was a boy who said, Open that suitcase. I woke happy at first, but then came the next pain, and I understood that I had everything to get through. Around noon that day, on a message from Zelda, Nectar returned. Let's go to the hospital, he said. I refused. You're scared, he said. Scared the white doctors will make fun of you. He waited, his lips firm and cold. He stayed handsome while I got shapeless and heavy, in the face and rough. I can't deliver it, he said. He tried to veil and gentle his voice, but a whine of annoyance poked through like wire. Who asked you? We'll get Fleur Pillager. But Rush's bear was standing behind him, eyes harsh, shrunken below the height of his shoulder. He went silent, rocked back from her. I laughed. Now who's afraid? The pillager was living back there with spirits, back where the words were logged off and brush twisted together. Impassable. She kept house and cared for Nana Push. That side of the lake belonged to her. Twice she lost it, twice she got it back. 4 times she returned. Now she wore moccasins, let her braids grow long, traveled into town on foot, scorned the nuns as they scorned her, visited the priest. She made no confession, though. Some said Father Damien Modeste confessed his sins to her. She received no forgiveness, no money, no welfare when that came about. And although Rush's bear was furious that her other son, Eli, loved her once and was rumored to go back there still, she always had to admit Fleur knew the medicines. She directed my husband sharply. This is the result of the only useful thing you ever did, she told Nectar, her lips tight and furious. That's all you're good for. Go bring the pillager, then get the children from school and find a place for them to stay in town. So he left us for a while. I tried to slow down, to rest, not let myself be overtaken, but soon the pains began to come faster, so I had to rock myself in and out of the grip. The day was clear and the sun blasted through the windows, lighting every corner. Rush's bear stoked the fire, and the air was so warm that a fly woke and buzzed its wings against the glass. All the other children were born at night. I never lain in bed this hour of the day. I tried to gather myself, but I began to lose track. Sometimes I saw myself as from a distance, driven by long swells of waves. The room was still moving when I looked about me. The gun rack and the lamp and the shelf for Nectar's books, the carved wooden wardrobe I'd bought with last year's cream money, lifted and fell. I put my hand out and Rush's bear put her hand into it. I turned my face away when the next one came. She did not let go. Namama, I told to her, and I knew I'd die. Everything stopped moving around me. The walls held. I saw tiny lights of spirits enter, and although they flickered all around the edges of the room, I was not afraid. The circles of silvery ghost lights fastened my pain and dragged it through the outer walls. Instead of dying, I sat up. Floor was there. I was wearing an old cotton nightgown, stained on the hem, but the women didn't care about that. Nobody said, your hair was a brush pile, you should fix it up. Nobody said, 2 years ago, your waist was thin as a girl's. Nobody looked at how solid my ankles had grown or how I'd spread in the arms. Nobody asked, why don't you ever wear those earrings? Put on some lipstick, stockings. Rush's bear sat across from me, and when I woke, she burned tobacco, sage. She gave me some tea, and I fell asleep again and woke in darkness, laboring strong. Now I clung on to their voices, all I had. They spoke to me in low tones. They told me when to hold my breath and when to let it go. I understood perfectly, although they spoke only the old language. I understood that I was to let my body be driven by the waves, like a boat to shore, like someone swimming toward a very small light. I followed directions, and that way, sometime the next afternoon, my child was born. I was washed and smoothed, put back underneath my covers in a fresh robe. The two women did all of these things quickly, without wasting emotion. I tried thanking them, but those words came too slow. Yet, in a state near dreaming, I heard the conversation in the room beyond. You take this, said Nectar. The money's yours. There was a clank as something hit the floor. The door closed. If that pillager won't take it, you can, said Nectar. Not from your hands. I'm your son, he said. No more. I only have a daughter. Her, he said, almost laughing, but she's a Lazar. You shame me, Rush's bear said. You never heard any wail out of her, any complaint. You never would know this birth was hard enough for her to die. I never saw this woman the same way I had before that day. Before that birth of the child, a son, after all. Rush's bear was a hot fire that I wanted to crush. After that, things were different. I never saw her without knowing that she was my own mother, my own blood. What she did went beyond the frailer connections. More than saving my life, she put the shape of it back in place. And even though her wild moods descended again and again with more violence until she was lost in those storms, sometimes for weeks, and even though sometimes she'd rise from her place behind the chair and bolt for home, even though she was more trouble to me than any child I ever had, I took care of the old woman every day of her life because we shared the loneliness that was one shape. Because I knew that in her old age, she shared that same boat where I had labored. She crested and sank in dark waves. Those waves were taking her onward through night, through day, the water beating and slashing across her unknown path. She struggled to continue. She was traveling hard, and death was her light.